Hey, Bridget here. So, as y'all know, this is one of my favorite times of year in the DMV area. And like many of y'all, I am busy planning weekend getaways to make sure that I can soak in all the area has to offer. That's why I'm so excited to plug one of Congress's latest national heritage areas in southern Maryland's Calvert, Charles, St. Mary's, and southern Prince George counties. So discover the area's heritage, scenic waterfront, and countless breweries, distilleries, and wineries. Learn more and discover where time and tide meet at destinationsouthernmaryland.com.
Today on CityCast DC, we are talking about the 2024 DC budget. And wait. I know the words municipal budget make people's eyes glaze over, but the annual debate on how the city is going to spend your tax dollars actually says a lot about where DC is and where it's headed. Like, should transportation be free? Should there be police officers in schools? Should the city be doing more in general to support low-income residents? Michael Brice-Saddler from the Washington Post has been covering the city budget debate. He's here to tell us what made it into the budget, what was cut, who won, and where things go from here. Today is Thursday, May 18th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Michael, thanks for being here.
Sure. Good to talk to you, Michael.
So the DC Council passed a budget, the first of two votes it has to pass this week. What does that mean? Is this like the start of the process or the end or the middle or what?
This is pretty close to the end of the process. So the budget process in DC is a months-long endeavor that usually begins with the mayor working with her own budgetary team and the CFO, figuring out the city's finances, and then she is tasked with building a balanced budget, factoring in all types of costs, short and long term, over a course of a 4 or 5 year financial plan. And then that budget gets transmitted to the council, and the council gets to basically kind of hash it apart, determine what priorities they think the mayor nailed it on, what should be spent otherwise. Then the various members take their thoughts and considerations, send them to the chair of the council, and the chair ultimately presents a finalized draft, you could say, that the members vote on, and that's what they voted on yesterday.
In your report about this, you wrote that district leaders have repeatedly described this year's budget process as one of the most arduous in recent history. Why is it arduous?
Well, much like the global economy is a bit unstable right now, DC has some questions about its own finances, particularly in the long term. You have commercial properties downtown that are a significant source of revenue. You have questions about how sustainable that revenue will be moving forward when we have increased remote work, office vacancies, property values have gone down. So there's questions about how much revenue DC will be able to bring in the out years compared to what it's used to. Not to mention you have contracts with the teachers union, collective bargaining agreements, other payments that the city has to make. And the pandemic also really exacerbated things in the sense that the federal government offered many cities and states funds to supplement programs for housing, low-income residents, things of that nature. And those funds are set to expire this upcoming fiscal year. So when you're thinking about long-term budgeting and you have, the chair of the council actually described it as something of a fiscal cliff in the sense that a lot of these programs that had a boost for 1 or 2 years during the pandemic will no longer have that boost. So council members and the mayor had to think about, well, how do we proceed knowing that demand for some of these programs is still high, but the funding source is going to have to change.
So you're saying there's challenges on both the income side and the spending side?
Yes.
One question about the income side, which I've always wondered. There's a lot of talk about the disasters of downtown and the low occupancy in offices, vacancy rates, stores closing. How tied to real estate values is the DC's tax base? Some places, almost all the money comes from real estate taxes. Some places, almost all the places taxes come from sales or income tax. Where's DC sit?
Last fiscal year was about 9% of DC's overall revenues came from commercial property values, especially from big office buildings. And DC is unique in that our downtown is made up of a lot of these buildings. You have the federal government that occupies some of them. So in some situations we're really stuck if the feds aren't coming back downtown. What are we going to do with these buildings? So that's been a big discussion point for a long time, but it is a significant source of revenue, and it's been a priority for the mayor and a lot of members of the council on how do we make up for this as these buildings are depreciating in value.
Right, and it's a challenge across the country because as people work from home, downtowns are in trouble. Let's dig into some of the specific issues on the other side of the ledger, on the spending side. Transportation, I don't know, maybe that was the one that got the most attention and heat. There were arguments over the so-called K Street Transitway, which is redoing K Street in the heart of downtown with bike lanes and bus lanes and making it prettier in general, versus this proposal to have the city pick up the tab to make Metrobus within the district free. There was talk about cutting circulator buses and a potential congestion surcharge on ride shares. Can you give us a state of play? What's been approved? Where did we land?
Sure. So everything you just mentioned was all part of that back and forth over the past several months of what should be funded and prioritized, and really was probably the most boisterous, I could say, argument between the mayor and the council. So where we're at now is the council initially hoped to make Metro buses free. It didn't work out. The Metro board said earlier this month that the plan needed more regional input, needs to be pushed. The council has also delayed a proposed $116 million makeover of the K Street corridor that Bowser really wanted. So you have no free buses. You have no K Street corridor, at least not until probably next year. But what you do have is 13 or so bus routes that are going to be 24 hours, which was a component of the free bus plan that has been salvaged. So we have 13 24-hour buses that are supposed to begin in January that made it. And you also have, instead of a $2 congestion fee for ride-hailing trips that was really not popular among the council and residents and Uber and Lyft, you have a 25 cents quote-unquote digital dispatch fee that is just going to be applicable to all rideshare rides in the city moving forward. That are going to be used to fund, in part, the 24-hour buses as well as some other initiatives that the council funded.
So just to be clear, the buses, you'll still have to pay for them, but the DC taxpayer basically is going to make up the difference to WMATA of what they'd be losing on running these overnight lines.
Yes.
And to clarify that the $2 proposal was only downtown, but the surcharge is for all rides all over the city.
That's right. The $2 congestion fee was for specific times of the day. It was supposed to just be applicable to the downtown corridor. What you have now is a 25-cent surcharge for combustion vehicles. That is for any rideshare ride you take in the city. It's not just downtown. It's getting point A to point B anywhere.
But if it's a Tesla Uber, it is exempt.
Not quite exempt. It's just a slightly lower cost. I think it's 15 cents if it's a hybrid and 10 cents if it's a electric vehicle.
So another issue that's been a big deal in DC, particularly as there's been a lot more media attention to crime, is school safety. Council had decided they were going to pull police officers out of school, saying that they make schools less safe. Now there's been a lot of pushback, and they're considering keeping police in schools. It's been kind of confusing. Where did they land?
So, yes, you're exactly right. A couple of years ago, the council moved to pull police out of schools, which was a pretty controversial vote even 2 years ago. The mayor was against that plan. She still is. And where we've evolved to is a successful proposal by the mayor to sunset that. It was a gradual pullout of police in schools. It was supposed to end in 2025. That's now ceased. No longer will police be pulled out of schools. And in the interim, another council member, Zachary Parker, proposed convening a focus group or a committee, in a sense, that will explore alternatives to policing in schools. But in the meantime, police are able to stay in schools. They don't need to be pulled out anymore. So that is kind of a reversal of what the council did a couple of years ago, with the understanding now that as the city thinks through alternatives, it's better to have some form of safety in there until they come up with something different.
Cold War era defectors sold secrets outside the British Embassy on Mass Ave. Allied operatives met at the Mayflower Hotel in 1925 and again in 2010. And odds are there was a spy on your train this morning. With more than 10,000 spies, DC truly is the capital of spycraft. And if you want to understand their secrets, step into their radio-transmitting shoes, or into James Bond's Aston Martin, you need to visit the International Spy Museum. Located just off the National Mall, the Spy Museum features 2 floors of exhibits and artifacts. They've got ciphers, submarines, and the actual ice axe that killed Leon Trotsky. While most DC museums discouraged me from touching the artwork, the Spy Museum gave me an undercover identity and tested my skills as a covert operative in a series of interactive challenges. Book your visit today at spymuseum.org. So there's a lot of other stuff that council is sort of perennials for council that they want to fund. There's affordable housing stuff. There are increased food benefits. There's childcare tax credit. On Tuesday, like at the 11th hour, Zachary Parker, who's a council member, proposed a spending plan that was going to address this. Other council members did not go for it. What happened?
So Parker, and he's actually the same lawmaker who proposed the committee to look at policing alternatives in schools. He wanted to go a little bit further to think of ways to fund programs for low-income residents, such as rental assistance. He was interested in a new child tax credit. He wanted more support for homeless services, for SNAP benefits, things in the budget that a lot of members would be happy to see, but in a tight budget, we couldn't quite find money for. He had the idea of basically extending a high tax rate that currently exists on big commercial land deals that was imposed back in 2019 by the mayor and the council. It was set to expire this year, I believe in September. His idea was, hey, let's not let that expire. Instead, let's extend it for 4 more years and use the revenue from that to pay for these programs, to put more money into, and hopefully be able to help more residents in need.
And one of the reasons people wanted that big commercial deal tax to expire was because they are hoping to see a lot of big commercial deals as they convert downtown office buildings to residential. So that was the logic there, right?
Right. So a few lawmakers yesterday mentioned that there are some commercial property owners, some business owners who have actually been waiting for this higher rate to expire before making transactions because it's more costly to them. So there was a fear with this proposal that, even not just talking about office to residential conversions, that this would potentially create more lags in building sales all across the city, which could impact the city's economic recovery long term. So there was quite a bit of pushback on Parker's proposal, even though, it was a bit of gamesmanship from him to say, hey, members, I have a way to fund all these things I know you're interested in. Like Christina Henderson, for instance, introduced a bill that passed to raise DC SNAP benefit that hasn't been funded yet. He tried to say, hey, if you go along with me on this, we'd be able to help fund that bill. But even Henderson was a bit apprehensive at the idea of not letting this tax expire, saying, we made a commitment that we were going to let this expire and we shouldn't renege on our promise. And there were other concerns that it's not sustainable to use a tax like this to fund these programs at a super high rate. I think Parker said it would be $390 million that could be generated if this tax was able to stay in place for a few more years.
So he said he wants more talk ahead of the final vote addressing the budget concerns in Ward 7 and 8, which are the 2 mostly east of the river wards that have historically had the most poverty in the district. Does that mean we're going to see this plan come back before the final vote?
I'd say it's really unlikely you see this exact plan come back. He withdrew it for a reason, knowing that it wasn't well supported or regarded. So what we'll likely see, and this usually happens between the first and second budget vote, is people getting creative, trying to find last minute ways to create revenue like he did, or at least find sources of revenue, I should say, to fund things at the 11th hour. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but it can be pretty tricky to win over enough members to have a proposal like that go through, especially a tax increase, which is always a touchy subject.
So I think for a lot of folks with long memories, like going back to when the city went broke in the 90s, the specters of things like the council killing a one-time infrastructure spending like K Street in order to pay for ongoing programs like 24-hour Metrobus routes, it feels kind of scary because it's sort of apples and oranges and so on. What do people say about how sustainable that move and the budget in general is in the long term? This has been a big piece of the mayor's critique.
Sure. When it comes to K Street, it wasn't killed solely to fund other programs. There were concerns from members about, is this actually the right time to try to tear up K Street and beautify it when we're trying to push people downtown now? The chairman brings up oftentimes this conversation of downtown needs to be fixed now. This is not something we can wait for in, however long this project is going to take. So let's, and not to mention the other big criticism of the K Street plan is that it's a little bit dated. It was conceptualized before the pandemic, before remote work, looks the way it does now. So the counter argument to the current K Street proposal that Bowser has put forth is, let's rethink it. Let's think about how this works in our current environment, come up with a plan that everyone can agree on is not dated and is good, and then we'll implement it next year. And they've left $8 million in the budget for the city to do just that, come up with another plan. Now, I don't think everyone would agree that the current plan is necessarily bad. Certainly the mayor would say it's, her version is good and it should have started when it was supposed to start. But ultimately the council was able to punt it a year. But there is a firm commitment from the chairman and Councilmember Charles Allen, who leads the transportation committee, that, assuming the plan they come up with is good and everyone agrees on it, this will be funded next year. So it's just a 1-year delay. It's not killed entirely.
I mean, is this sustainable budgeting? Like the stuff they have funded, can we reasonably expect it will be fundable in 5 years or 10 years?
I would say no. I mean, realistically, programs like emergency rental assistance, for instance, there's an understanding that right now, even as DC is maybe you could say post the peak concerns of the pandemic or post where we saw the most levels of unemployment during the pandemic, that people are still in need of this emergency rental assistance. The council said that within 2 months of this year that the $43 million that was allocated ran out. So the mayor funded it at $8 million next fiscal year. And they were like, hey, $8 million is not going to last a day if we couldn't get $43 million to last for, a few months. So, realistically, though, no, they're going to need to figure out another way if they'd like to continue to fund, say, emergency rental assistance at $40+ million. You're not going to be able to continue to kill plans and things like that to make it work.
At some point in the future, either this mayor or another mayor is going to have to either propose getting rid of it or raising some other form of revenue to pay for it.
Right, or just lowering it, lowering the funding back to what we saw before the pandemic, which is what the mayor sought to do in her original budget proposal. She came out and said, this is not sustainable. We need to be thinking about how we fund programs long term. And a lot of stuff was pumped up because of short-term federal funding that was given to states for the pandemic. And it created a fiscal cliff. The city's working to try to make it less dramatic for the people who are still relying on those services. You had the mayor proposed cuts to legal aid, to victim services that had been funded at a higher level than they were in the past. So they were able to make up some of that for now, but it's not a long-term spending plan or anything like these. These are 1-year fixes, and they'll need to look at this again next year.
So there's one more vote. When is it? And do you expect any changes between now and then?
So the next vote on the budget is May 30th. I would expect you'll see members like Zachary Parker or others, Trayon White in Ward 8, you mentioned, the council members from Ward 7 and 8 both came forward and say, hey, we don't think this goes quite far enough on some of the things we'd like to see changed in our wards. Trayon White held a press conference outside of the Wilson Building, City Hall downtown before the vote, and really lamented the fact that there's a number of recreation centers and schools in his ward that need help. So he's trying to think of ways to find money to go toward construction at those schools and to clean up fields and to beautify the area a bit more. So I think we'll see proposals like that. I don't think we'll see any type of major overhaul that would have significant consequence on how things look now. But usually the most changes come between the first and second vote. So we'll have to see.
Michael Brice-Saddler, thank you for being here.
Sure. Thank you. Really appreciate it, Michael.
And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, do us a favor and rate the show on whatever podcast app you're using. It helps us out a lot. And tell your friends to listen and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with our weekly roundup of stories, including a recap of Bowser's trip to Congress on Tuesday. Talk to you then.